I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Matthew Libatique, the cinematographer on Don't Worry Darling and also on The Whale. Matthew, first of all, this is your first time working with Olivia Wilde, and I know just from speaking with other people involved on the film that she's very clear about her vision about for the visual element of her film. And I'm just wondering, when you first met with her, what was the discussion that you and her had about the look and feel of this film?
Well, when we first got together in person, we're talking about sort of COVID times, when film started to come back. So a lot of it was phone calls, but it's limited to be able to actually speak and can articulate things, even through emailing images. But when we first got together, I was struck by a wall of images that she had behind her desk. That was essentially her, image board for the film. And when we just spent a couple hours going through each and every image, and sort of the notion of this world where people were sexy and debaucherous, and a throwback to this time, this idyllic time. And the idea of the theme of the Rat Pack, the Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Lawrence, and Dean Martin of it all, and how it's just like a cocktail with ice and like a cigarette for everybody. And that just having that be the sort of general mise en scène. That's the vibe you get from the very first scene. And these people are living their best lives, and this is the world that the film exists in until it doesn't.
Yeah.
So visually, a lot of the things, obviously the sort of edge to it, she had a very specific idea of what that edge was. And it had just like this sort of like 90s or 80s, 90s thriller-esque sex in it, and modernized to our time, but all encapsulated within the sort of 50s packaging. And working with Ariane Phillips and Katie Byron, they had already had so much discussion about palette and design, the mid-century modern feel of Palm Springs as Victory, as well as all the color you see in the wardrobe. It was really about what does cinematography do beyond that. And what we came up with is essentially, looking at all these candid photos that were her references, and stylistic photos, is like, how do we bridge the gap between this candid nature of photographs of people, the Rat Pack in Vegas, versus like these beautiful images of eyes, this one specific images of an eye. And then folding in the work of artists like Alex Prager, who always had bold feminine characters. It sort of all informed what we were our choice.
Yeah.
Our choices.
There's so much to unpack in the visual elements of the film. Let's start with this. Yeah, let me start with the your work with Ariane, the costume designer, and Katie, production designer, because I was fascinated by the color palette that you went with as well, obviously, in bringing their work to life. So the externals are very colorful and pastels, and the beautiful blue skies and symmetrical palm trees and the mountains in the background of Palm Springs. But the internals are quite muted and natural stone and beige and foam. And I was just really fascinated about how you were switching up the way you lit and shot the film externally and then internally, and how difficult that was.
Well, externally, you're given a light. You're basically you're given the light. It's presented to you, and you're choosing when to shoot certain things for a given effect. So there's a bit of a box that you're in when you're choosing that. And to bridge the gap between our interior exterior, we did quite a few scenes outside of their house, but the interior, the lion's share of the interior, was basically following the sun path of the actual exterior. If you followed sort of the sun coming up in the back of the house and setting in the front of the house. And when you watch the film, we followed that time of day, working with the script supervisor. What time is it? This is the next day. It's morning. The sun is in the backyard. It's afternoon. Jack, Harry Styles' character, comes home. The sun setting in the front of the house. We're just sort of, I don't know if people pick up on that, but it goes to a visual language that blends the two together, interior and exterior. I think what you mentioned earlier is interesting because the color does pop on the outside.
Yeah.
But when you take you're in a real location, you have to do what you can to bring everything into the language of the film. And I think wardrobe really did that. I mean, if we're outside in Palm Springs, we're put into our world. If we're in the desert, we're put into our world based on the actor silhouettes and the character silhouettes and the color that they're wearing brings us into the film that we've been accustomed to throughout the entirety of it. And on the interior, it's much easier. I have choices to make. I created the box of having to have the sun path be the same as the exterior,
Yeah.
but ultimately, we were aiming for something very natural. Again, going into it and talking to Olivia, we really wanted people to think that this was the movie.
Yeah.
This world is the world we live in until we discover that it isn't the world.
And what really interests me as a viewer is we know something nefarious is probably going on. That's the point of the film. But I was like, well, Victory looks great. Let's stay here. Like it's just it was seductive and mesmerizing, and a lot of that, and but also it felt dangerous because I felt like there was so much glass, and the way that some of your camera angles moved around that main household, I felt like I was being overly exposed or watched. And that nefariousness is very hard for me as a layperson to put my finger on it. I'm wondering if there's anything in particular that was intentional about the way you shot the film, particularly in the house, that made us feel like this is seductive, and yet I feel really uneasy.
Most of it lies within the subjectivity of her character, or Alice's character, Florence Pugh's character. The character of Alice is, I think, is what drives the visual language of the movie. So when you see her by herself, when Harry, when Jack and Alice are together, it's a relationship. But as soon as he goes to work, there's something else that's happening, and it was a mixture of. That's where we really played, and I think that's where the film really exists. Is that being wide and seeing her small within this confines of this basically dollhouse, and seeing her from outside the glass looking back in. And she's almost like, metaphorically, she's encapsulated into a space. It just happens to be a wonderfully beautiful space.
Yeah.
But and she's doing this 50s housework, every morning when he leaves, she's cooking breakfast for him every morning before he leaves, and she has dinner ready every time he comes home. It's just like, what is this world, so for us, it was really about having the camera either very far away from her and making her small inside the space, or being very close to her so that we were inside her personal space.
Wow. I love that. And then when we eventually see the real world, that is more oppressive, desaturated, run down, and actually nefarious, because it doesn't look like a place you'd want to be. So that counterpoint is so interesting, and it really hammers home the beauty of Victory. So you got to play in the real world, so to speak. Was that by the way, that reminded me a lot of your previous work, to be honest. Beautiful work, darker. So you got to play there. What were your thoughts on the real world? Not the transitions, because I want to go there in a second. Just the apartment.
Almost anything we would do, strategically, we created this will touch back on a question you asked earlier. One of the things we did from a technical standpoint is create a lookup table that accentuated color that was in our palette. And the thing I focused on in prep was to make sure, and working with Ariane, is to do tests on all the colors. And Katie, I wanted to make sure whatever I was doing from a cinematography standpoint was going to honor the actual hues that were placed by the design. So we used sort of there's an artist named Erwin Olaf, photographer, and we use him as an example of like what the feeling sort of skin tone would be against color, and we created a LUT that way. And the reason I say this is because when we went to the present day, we debeautified the film by just using more of a grittier lookup table to sort of to steer that look away from Victory. And not that it would be hard. I mean, once you leave the pristine nature of Palm Springs and the mid-century architecture and the clothing, you're automatically transformed to a different place. But it wasn't that hard. It was just it was it just wasn't. It was you could feel the crew just be like, this isn't as fun as what we were doing before. You know, you could feel it. It's like, okay, this, I know we have to do this, but like it's not as cool as what we were doing with the old cars and the and the cool clothes and the cool people,
Yeah.
but it wasn't heavy lifting to go there. Once she got out of Victory, it was like, I think it sort of speaks to how much was going into what we did in Victory, how easy it was to make the transition to, the banality of the present day.
Yes, banality is a great word for that. Let's talk about the transitions, because honestly, Matthew, I think I saw the film 6 weeks ago and I still haven't been able to get some of those images out of my mind, honestly. I just think, like, what does Olivia do? Does she say, I'm thinking like synchronized swimmer like girls dancing with their legs in an iris formation with an iris and a blood drop? Like, what goes on when you're both working together on this is the conceptualization for the transitions between Victory and the present day? It blew me away.
Well, the iris was a big one for her because it was the source of how this technology worked.
Yeah.
So I thought that was clever for on her part, very clever to just make sure that this the shape of a circle was basically something that appeared over and over in the film. Early on, you had no idea why. I mean, there's one of the first shots is right after the first scene is them doing donuts in a car. The camera's up high, looking down, and they're creating basically a circle. And that right there, and then it goes from something so macro. I mean, so macro to something so micro with the coffee cup. Where it's at the end of the movie, it's just like an endless and bottomless cup of coffee that just keeps taking coffee in a circle. That was something as a theme for her that she could play with and put not only the shape as kind of a metaphor, this sort of curvature inside a world of straight lines. It sort of spoke to sort of a feminine, masculine thing to me. But she was able to take things she was interested in, like the idea of these Busby Berkeley dancers, the objectification of these women within a sense of conformity, and they were also in that shape. And then when you go to the reveal of Alice's sort of state where she's imprisoned. I mean, it's really a tight of the eye, and that the eye is forced to watch these images, and that's part of the technology. So I think she's really good at layering her ideas within into a deep meaning.
Yeah, a lot of the credit though for the final product goes to you. Katie Byron mentioned that when she set up the black scene for you, and she just said the way that you were able to shoot that was so stunningly beautiful. Yeah, I mean, talk us through the intentional camera angles that you were using. I mean, it's edited beautifully as well, and so when you put all of your crafts together, it just turns into this gorgeous, weird, bizarro transition that I'm still thinking about. So yeah, talk me through that.
Well, I credit Olivia that once she has such a power and skill to being able to get people on board to her vision. So it becomes singular. That's why I give her all the credit in the world. Like you're allowed as an artist to play within that frame, but that frame is clearly defined. So I don't know. It's like a kind of a perfect way for a person, whether it be an editor or a cinematographer, costume designer, or production designer, to work. It's like everybody has a voice, yet everybody's moving in the same direction. And all the themes and layers sort of orchestrated by Olivia is wonderful. It was a wonderful experience to work in. But so within that, being able to play, I think that's where when people talk about the cinematography of the film, it was really a give and take with design and the wardrobe and the needs of the narrative. Really, it wasn't this is going to be a beautiful shot. This is how do we make this beautiful but have it be exactly what the story needs to be told. And I think everybody did that. Everybody served the story and not necessarily themselves.
there's a few action shots as well, which you tend to be really good at. Things that we don't expect in a film that we would think we would be more intimate and not so action orientated. But the car, all those gorgeous cars driving towards the mound,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overheads. Do you find those shots fun to do? Is that like your wheelhouse? Is that something that you look forward to?
I like to think I get paid to light faces. To be honest
Yeah,
with you. But yeah, of course. Building that sequence is, I think if I'm proud of anything in the film, it's that sequence, because, or the action sequence, because, we didn't have a second unit, and Olivia and I, Olivia's intention was, I asked her in prep, it's like, what do you want the sequence to be? And she said, I want a badass action sequence. I mean, literally said, I want a badass action sequence. I'm like, okay. So that puts a lot of pressure on us. And we knew what kind of weight it had in the third act.
yeah,
So there was a lot of anxiety going into that sequence, but we worked really hard, day after day, just storyboards, cutting the boards, trying to trim it down for what we had budgetarily, and then planning the shoot according to the light of this desert, and getting the right equipment. Basically, it was just a great effort, and it was first unit, not second unit doing it, which was, but we took sort of a second unit mentality to it. It's like, what? Okay, let's not get too precious. We need this gear. The basic thing was, we needed to make it look like Florence Pugh was driving this car.
yeah, yeah.
And that was everything.
Amazing. Before I let you go, one don't worry, darling question, and that is, you talk about your work with Olivia and her singular vision. Obviously, when you think about pairings in cinema, like for example, Scorsese and Schoonmaker, I think about Aronofsky and you. Some of your work with Darren has just blown my mind over the years, like Requiem and Mother, and your Oscar-nominated Black Swan. But for me, it's The Fountain. I've seen that so many times, and just so beautiful. I want to frame every image on my wall. And I just wonder, like, what is it about your work with Darren, and of course now The Whale, which people are going to start seeing soon? What is it about Darren Aronofsky? What does he bring to the table that you just want to keep going back to him and working together?
Well, I mean, he's one of my best friends in the world. I mean, I've known him for my whole adult life. So that's one thing, and it's just, he's a brother, and we enjoyed working together from the very beginning. We've had our ups and downs, and but we've grown a lot, and now it's an absolute joy. It's so different now working with him on The Whale versus when we worked together on Pi.
Yeah,
We've come a long way, and it's interesting because we both learned so much, and our priorities are different in terms of being filmmakers. I mean, when we started, it was like, we're trying to take over the world.
yeah,
When we started, it was like, how much sugar can we pour in this coffee before it ceases to be coffee? And now it's like, we're just both much more mature. And what's the most important thing here? Black Swan, what's the most important thing here? The Whale, what's the most important thing? So now we pared down the sugar, and now we're a little more, a little more moderate taste, more of a taste profile.
yeah. That's what happens as we get older, and we get wiser. And I look forward to you and Darren being really old men and still pumping out these gorgeous films. We'll see what happens, right? Matthew, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Thank you so much.